But yeah, why don't we pray and we can get started here. Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to come together on a Wednesday night and just study your word and have some good time of fellowship and mutual discussion and understanding of your word in a deeper way. And I just pray that you be with us during this study and enlighten us to the things you have for us from your word tonight. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, we're in Judges chapter 8, and I believe this starts on page 63 of your books. So it's interesting that the opening questions on this are about politicians. So we can tread lightly, just because I'm sure everyone is sick of political talk. But here's an interesting thing to think about. All right, so question 1 in your book. Why do political candidates feel the need to present their achievements and abilities as flawless? Or do you even think that's a real thing anymore?
You kidding?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, you're kidding. You don't think it's a real thing anymore? Am I not reading this question right?
Well, maybe they don't always go out of the way these days to present themselves as flawless. I can think of a particular candidate who is known for being rough around the edges, and people seem to like him for that. So in that instance...
I think they go out of their way to lie and do everything they can to present themselves as flawless.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the word is flawless.
Mm-hmm.
I think the word is stellar.
Stellar.
Cut above.
You don't hear the word stellar a lot.
They're cut above. That's a good word.
Yeah.
If you want to vote for somebody who's a cut above,
Yeah.
they're up here. You know, that's what I think. So I think flawless isn't that.
Yeah.
In our day and age, we're past flawless, you know.
I would argue that.
What?
I actually saw a political commercial, and I was actually shocked. It was nobody I could vote for, but she was open and upfront that she was a former addict, and why she could use that to represent people. And she did, I guess since she can't hide it, she just kind of put it out there and said, okay, you know what? Yeah, I've come from this, but look what I've done since. So
One of the few things better than flawless is a comeback story.
yeah.
You know. So she couldn't be a current addict and do that.
Right.
That wouldn't work as well.
And she would definitely fall under the one down here where the majority would be okay, right?
Yeah, that's a minority view, yeah. Yeah. Okay, question 2. What part do their constituents' expectations play in how they present themselves? So,
Well, because it's kind of like you're expected to have a wife, a couple kids, they're supposed to be flawless as well, and so that's what they play to.
mm-hmm. Do you think this is unique with politics, or does this kind of go elsewhere?
There's a lot elsewhere.
Yeah. Got a lot of pressure to look and be our best, and
I mean, it never happens at work, if that's what you're thinking.
all right, this isn't in your book, but there's a question about disappointment of politicians. Interesting question, because we're different ages and span different political history. What politician has disappointed you the most in your lifetime? And that's an interesting question, because you had to have a good expectation to be disappointed. Do you remember that well?
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
All the scandal. I mean, I was, teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he already would have had a second term, but because of the wording thing,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't find out what the other guys were doing.
Yeah.
It wasn't really, he had it in the bag, but he still wasn't sure.
Mm-hmm.
He was pretty good with foreign policy and stuff like that, but that all kind of went by the wayside.
Were you more disappointed in his actions or what developed out of it?
Or what developed out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Was tied to the way things getting out there.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
There's just a lot today.
Yeah.
All the scandal and everything that's going on.
Yeah.
You know, both sides, both party side.
I think your view of that changes though, like you're disappointed in the person when you're younger.
Mm.
And as you get older and stuff, I think you're more disappointed in what fell out of the whole thing.
Mm.
You look at it with a broader eye, I think, when you get older.
Like you're disappointed with the system.
Yeah, not just a person, but you know, kind of
Mm-hmm.
grows or I guess when you get older, you get a better understanding.
Mm-hmm.
You see more.
Do you think maybe, even though we want the stellar candidate, do you think there's probably a part of you that knows, like, humans are flawed, so that doesn't even shock you as much, or?
You mean less stellar.
There you go.
Yeah.
See, some of them I don't expect much of them.
Yeah.
So I don't,
Not a lot of disappointment.
nope.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to close the sense of the Bible studies.
Yeah.
Good move.
Yeah. We appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. So searching the scriptures. So Gideon, we talked about before, Gideon represents the turning point in this book. That's when things start changing. So it's interesting that we talked about there's been this standard judge cycle that gets set up early on where you have, okay, Israel rebels. I've said this 100 times. They rebel, they are oppressed, they cry out, God raises up a deliverer, repeat. This is the first judge where after the deliverance, the story keeps going. So where the story ended last week when Gideon had victory and he beheaded those two princes, according to our cycle, that's where the story should end, and then there should be the next judge, the way it's been presented. But it sort of ends up dealing with the reality of situations that are more complex, and the story just kind of keeps going. Okay, so can someone just what were the thoughts that we kind of came to on Gideon? How did we feel about him at the end of last week?
Like he was sort of, well, I thought this way anyway. He was sort of an apprentice in a sense. Like it seemed like he knew, even though he was a nobody like the other nobodies that got picked, it seemed like he had to learn it even more.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like that.
Mm-hmm.
More reinforcement.
Yeah, he needed that confidence.
Yeah.
He needed his hand held.
Yeah, he was not stellar. Yeah. Like he wasn't the shining figure of the judge who, like we said, even Barak, he had faith issues, but he led armies. He knew what he was doing, at least. Gideon is the strange thing that starts shifting the book. And that's sort of what just keeps happening. So we're going to start in chapter 8, but we'll actually jump back a couple verses to remind us of who we're dealing with. This is after the battle, after things happen. If you remember, chapter 7, verse 24. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites and take before them the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, took the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan, and they took two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb, and they slew Oreb upon the rock of Oreb. Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. So it's just important to have Ephraim in your head, because, okay, who beheaded these two Midianite princes? These are the people of Ephraim. Now they're bringing the heads to Gideon. Okay, chapter 8, verse 1. And the men of Ephraim said unto him, Why hast thou served us thus, that thou calledst us not when thou went to fight with the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply. And he said unto them, What have I done now in comparison of you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abizer, his tribe? God hath delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb, and what was I able to do in comparison of you? Then their anger was abated toward him when he had said that. What are they angry about? Like you get this strange little interaction here. What are they upset about? Why? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't come to the party? Yeah. So the book points out that Ephraim it's further south in the country and probably wouldn't have been even like a reasonable group to call early on until the people started fleeing. And yeah, they have this strange thing. The book does talk about the idea of, and you can imagine in ancient warfare, okay, they raided and slaughtered the camp of Midian, and they said like, okay, well, there's probably like loot involved there. There's probably cattle and supplies and all the food that the Midianites had been taking from them for all that time. But yeah, there's this odd issue of like they kind of didn't get to partake in this battle, and there's maybe money, maybe glory, like a weird thirst for violence in this. Revenge, yeah.
Because they were oppressed as well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so it's this odd little interaction between the two. So how should, this is question 3 in your book, how should the people of Ephraim have responded to the victory? Yeah.
It didn't cost them anything extra to do for the victory. They were losing that.
Yeah. Well, and the fact that they weren't there is what sort of amplified the miraculous situation that we talked about last week with the 300 men with the lanterns and the horns. Like, that was sort of God's purpose in glorifying himself and not Gideon, not Ephraim, none of these soldiers.
I was going to say that right now.
Okay.
You asked me how did they feel about God?
How did who feel about God?
Ephraim.
How do you think they felt about God?
I think it's sort of clear that they probably maybe didn't have a lot of faith, but the only reason I asked is because what he could have given in that story, as opposed to what he did, like he could have said, "This is
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I wanted to do it with few people as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and with less warriors than you guys."
Yeah.
But he didn't do that.
Yeah, he really is diplomatic with them, like surprisingly so. He's like, "Hey, you guys killed the princes. What did we even do?" Which is odd because he's also sort of downplaying what God did, but he's definitely turning away their, what is it, a soft word turns away wrath, or I forget the exact proverb, but yeah, he's oddly diplomatic in this moment. Yeah, so that's interesting. Question 4, what might Gideon have been tempted to say to Ephraim? How would you have handled this situation?
You didn't get the invitation?
Lost in the mail. Yeah.
The problem was they would have come all the way down there to help fight, and God would have turned them away anyhow.
Yeah.
Maybe they wouldn't have accepted that.
Mm-hmm. Kind of makes you wonder how the soldiers who got initially turned away felt.
Right.
Some of them were left because they were scared, and that's who God told to leave. But the others are like, "Yeah, you drank water the wrong way, so God wants you to go home." So there might be some odd feelings, and that's what's interesting about the story of Gideon. It starts delving into some of these very broken human situations. But let's carry on in the text at verse 4. And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men that were with him, faint, yet pursuing them. They're still chasing other Midianites. And he said unto the men of Succoth, Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And the princes of Succoth said, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thine army? Gideon said, actually, let's just stop there. Yeah, that was abrupt. What's happening? Why are they not helping Gideon?
It's kind of like you're saying, who are you?
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yeah, any other thoughts?
Perhaps they had some loyalty to the people that he was pursuing.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Even though they were oppressors.
What did you say?
Perhaps that the people who didn't give bread to Gideon's army had some loyalty to the people that Gideon had. Or maybe even feared retribution for helping him if Gideon didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it helps the person who's after him. Now these people are going to come down on him hard.
Yeah. Yeah, so the book, in question 5, they link it to the amount of faith that the people of Succoth had in God. Do you think that plays into it? Interesting. We got pastor and deacon in conflict.
It's all part of what they knew.
Yeah.
They might not have known it.
Yeah.
So you have like this war going on, and whose side you gonna care for?
Mm-hmm.
If you care for the wrong side, they're gonna come back and get you. So you're kind of like you're in between these two battling. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
But that's sort of a lack of faith in God, right?
I don't know if it's like
Gideon said, hey, God said this, and they're saying that, and he says, you get the program.
I don't know. It doesn't say what he said. If they don't, if they're ignorant of the entire situation, said, look, there's war, we're kind of like trying to get on the upside of this and finish him off, and they don't say anything else. I don't know if that much faith is involved in this. This is a human level of whose side they be on.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to win?
Yeah. Like, are they lacking faith in God or in Gideon? That is the question. Like,
If they knew anything of Gideon,
right.
They probably were like,
Yeah. Well, and I think this is an interestingly, because so technically, okay, Gideon is on a mission from God. Like, that's just what's happening here. And so technically Succoth should have helped, because that would have actually, high level, that would have been the right thing to do. They don't seem to know this, and it kind of brings in that conflict of wouldn't it be great if the right thing was always crystal clear, black and white? We dealt with some of this, not to bring up bad times, but we dealt with some of this during early lockdown type stuff here, with COVID, where it's okay, if this is as serious as it's being said, then we should keep doors shut. And you had churches on both sides, no, it's our duty before God to assemble and be the church. And then others, well, no, it's our duty to love our neighbor and not take part in spreading a disease. They're especially early on, the less information you have, there are not always clear sides on the right and wrong, and even the church can be divided on how to best serve God in any given point. And yeah, I think it's an interestingly human problem that Gideon's dealing with. But let's see how he reacts. So verse 7. So Gideon said, after they refused him bread, Gideon said, Therefore, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and briars. And he went up thence to Penuel, and spake unto them likewise. The men of Penuel answered the same as the men of Succoth had answered him. And he spoke also unto the men of Penuel, saying, When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. So apparently there's a big tower in Penuel, and in the most ironic phrasing possible, he says, when I come in peace, which he means, when this war is over, when I come in peace, I'm going to destroy this big fortified tower in your city. What do you think of his reactions? Mm-hmm.
In that day and age, I mean, it's not like today where information is traveling quickly. I mean, they may have known there was a battle, but they didn't know how extensive it was and what he was actually doing. Jason was doing that part of it.
Right.
Want to help them if they had anything to do with the people he's chasing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's likely they didn't even know who Gideon was.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like he was a general or, oh, okay, we know who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He was just Gideon. Yeah.
But each sound right now, if you, so if you're not gonna do this, you're siding with the enemy.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna be the enemy, you're gonna side with the enemy and become a tree like that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I like him this week. I didn't like him too much last week. So maybe.
He's definitely tougher.
He's tough, yeah, he's tough enough, right?
Okay, do we generally, is this right or wrong? Is he, like, should he be reacting this way? Should he be this violent? Like,
It's war and he wants to win.
yeah.
And God told him to.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like he believes it now.
Yeah.
See, and that's my way of putting it, like, see, because God's in on this. And he's reacting like different times how God reacted in the past.
Mm-hmm.
God said, look, do this or die. And guess what? God granted them the promise he told. Like, if they didn't do it, see it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he did that a lot.
Mhm.
So we've seen example after example of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it's sort of like that.
Yeah, so to me, and feel free to disagree, but to me, this is the start of the dark turn of Gideon. Like, to me, this seems way overboard, even though I get it. If you put it in the context of an action movie and you go, wow, yeah, like, okay, cool, you know. In reality, as he's chasing the enemy, he's sort of becoming them a little bit. He's becoming harsh and brutal, and, like, does he even have the authority to punish other Israelites because they're not helping him the way that he wants them to? I think you can highly debate it, at least. It's not clear, and the text doesn't go out of its way to say, hey, this is the right thing that Gideon did or not, but everything sort of seems to start spiraling after. Like, he had his big moment of faith when he won that battle with the 300 men, and then he just kind of starts getting weird and dark.
Well, a big change from verse 4 and verse 8.
Oh, yeah, the very sudden way he's responding to these other Israelites, yeah.
So they helped him.
But they helped him.
The original ones where he kind of like downplayed what he had done.
Oh, you mean Ephraim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really different.
Mm-hmm.
It changes to a lot.
Well, perhaps if he had went to, like, the first group and said, God is sending you on this mission to get these people,
Mm-hmm.
could be freed, and then knowing that God, putting God first in it, not just making it sound like he's chasing them, maybe more apt to.
Yeah, it is interesting that his interactions with God don't seem to come up as he's dealing with people later. You'd think that'd be the way to go, but...
Well, I know how this ends, so.
What's that?
I know how this ends.
Oh, sure.
So, saying that this is the start of a dark, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. But yeah, let's carry on here. So we don't need to read it. Almost nothing happens in the pursuing battle. They basically keep going. Gideon made his threats. They track down the Midianites, and they're hunting these. They seem to have the people of Ephraim had beheaded 2 princes of Midian, and then these are 2 kings of Midian. I don't know exactly how the power structure is set up, or if Midian represents multiple small kingdoms that you can have two kings of Midian, or I don't know what the scenario is. But they track them down, they kill the men, and they seem to take these kings with them because there's going to be an interaction, and then the kings show back up in a conversation later. So he takes the kings captive. But then let's look at 8:15. So he's coming back. And he came unto the men at Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom you did upbraid me, the people you used to mock me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thy men that are weary? He took the elders of the city and the thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. Now that is, again, a very strange phrasing, because, what? So he gave them a lesson on briars and thorns?
He sure did.
Yeah, so it literally means like he taught them a lesson. Like it's an odd way that it gets. I guess it's just the Hebrew to English of it, but yeah, like he basically beats them, whips them with these thorns. These are elders of Israel. Okay, verse 17. And he beat down the tower of Penuel and slew the men of the city. So again, he goes back to Succoth and Penuel and does exactly what he said, and probably even a little more. He said he was going to knock down a tower, and now he's killing other Israelites. So as far as his dark turn,
That could have been a reaction too.
oh, I'm sure people weren't happy that he was beating down the tower.
They started to attack him once he started to take the tower down.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah, it just overall got ugly in every conceivable way. Okay. Page 66. Won't be looking at it, but just so you're with me in the book. Okay. Let's continue at verse 18. Okay, yeah, so this is where the kings come back in. Then he said unto Zebah, let me preface, this is an odd interaction here with the kings of Midian. And a few surprising and weird things come out of this, and I just want you to look out for what strikes you about this interaction, and we'll talk about it. Okay, verse 18, then he said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What manner of men were they whom you slew at Tabor? And they answered, As thou art, so were they. Each one resembled the children of a king. And he said, They were my brethren, even the sons of my mother, as the Lord liveth. If ye had saved them alive, I would not slay you. And he said unto Jether, his firstborn, Up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared, for he was yet a youth, he was just a kid. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise thou and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were on their camels' necks. First thing, does anyone have a footnote in verse 21 by the word ornaments?
Yes.
Christmas. Yeah, what does your footnote say?
Crescent ornaments.
Yeah, that's an odd thing. So, yeah, mine has the exact same thing. And it seems that this isn't a generic word for, jewelry that is on the camel for some reason. They seem to be crescent moon-shaped pendants that he's taking from the camels. And today, if someone had like a moon-shaped necklace, that wouldn't be a big deal. It's just a moon. Back then, it would have very likely represented some sort of pagan deity cult. Like the moon was a big part of pagan worship. It's another odd move that he specifically takes this. But what do you think of the rest of the interaction? Anything strike you about that? No pun intended.
Well, they kind of challenged him after his son didn't slay him.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of said, well, almost it's kind of like you're so tough.
Do it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was
He called their bluff. What do you think about the fact that he said he wasn't going to kill them?
I just guess some kind of political alliance once the war was.
Okay.
I don't know why else, why you gonna keep around it?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would guess.
Yeah.
But when did he say he wouldn't kill them?
If you hadn't done what you did for the reason, I would not say. Like that. Well, his brothers.
Yeah, Tabor. That was the region that his tribe, little clan would have been from. Yeah, so it struck me as odd that, okay, so he just got finished beating and killing some Israelites. And he wasn't going to kill these foreign kings who he just had been chasing, the people who had been oppressing them, until he found out, oh, you actually killed some of my people, like closer relations, my people. I thought that was weird. Like, that's odd. And then the interaction with his son is also weird. You can kind of picture that in some movie, normally like your villain warlord who wants his small son to do something horrific. Like, you can kind of picture that, and it's weird. Again, it's just Gideon's character just goes really dark. I think if you could stretch it out to like a 2-hour movie, you would just see like the slow descent into like violence and anger and bitterness of this person. Almost every section of this is just odd, and it gets strange. But okay, so there's a good chunk of text that I want to read, and it's going to take us through Gideon's life. Not a whole lot more happens to him, but I just want to read that and point out a few things. I think it's going to be important for us to just read it at a clip here. So let's start in verse 22. Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son's son, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you, that you would give me every man the earring of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because the people they had killed were Ishmaelites. And they answered, We will willingly give them. And they spread a garment and did cast therein every man his earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold. That is about 43 pounds of gold. In case you're not up on your shekels. Besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about the camels' necks. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah, and all Israel went thither a-whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house. Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more, and the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. And Jerubbaal, Gideon, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. Gideon had 310 sons, that is 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives, and his concubine was in Shechem, and also bare him a son whose name was called Abimelech. And Gideon, the son of Joash, died a good old age, and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again and went a-whoring after Balaam and made Baal-bereth their god. All right, so we covered the rest of Gideon's life. And there's a few interesting things. So they want him to be king, which is sort of going to start setting up, the idea for the book of 1 Samuel when they actually invoke a kingship, when they actually have a king. And it sets up the idea that's going to be prevalent through the rest of the book, where it's there was no king in Israel in those days, and people did what was right in their own eyes. So they set up this idea of, the people are already sort of looking for a king. They really like that Gideon handled the Midianites, and they want this newly strong, tough guy to be their king. And he refuses, and that seems to be a good mark on his character there, and he, at least to an extent, understood what the judges were supposed to be. They just ruled, kept order in place for God, and he says, no, the Lord will rule over you. So he rejected the kingship and then did everything in his power to act like a king. Okay? So he collects all this gold. He's like, hey, no, I won't be your king. But if you guys wouldn't mind doing me a favor, just get the earrings. And does that remind you of anything? Collecting these earrings of gold? Does it remind you of a scene in the Bible? Yeah, that's exactly what they did at the base of Mount Sinai. They thought, they didn't know what happened to Moses. He's been up on this flaming mountain for like 40 days. And Aaron has them collect all the gold earrings and different jewels and stuff. And that's when he makes the golden calf. And that's what, we'll talk about what Gideon does, but as far as acting like a king, he collects money from his people. He has a bunch of wives, which is a very common, especially ancient Near East king thing to do. And he has a son named Abimelech. So the text goes out of its way to say that he had a concubine in Shechem. And we don't have a class for concubines today. It's a legal relationship somewhere in between a mistress and a wife. They seem to have the protection of marriage in a sense, but they don't seem to have the same rights, and there's not the same inheritance type stuff. It's an odd, we don't have a category for it today. But he names that son Abimelech, which the book points out on page 67. The name Abimelech means, my father is king. I laughed out loud when I read that. I thought that was really funny. The guy who wouldn't be king just went out of his way.
It doesn't really say here, though, how much time did or didn't go by after he said, I don't really want to be king. I want you to look at God as your king. God should get the credit for this, not me.
Mm-hmm.
So how much time went before he decided, well, you know what, okay, if you get me the gold and stuff like this, then I'll be king. So do you think it happened immediately?
It sounds fairly short.
Well, he has 70 kids. It probably took him some time. No, and it doesn't really matter if it happened, if all this happened over the rest of his life, because he seemed to rule for at least 40 years. They had peace, it says. But yeah, it's interesting that his actions don't seem to match his words in this scenario. Oh, no, and probably, sure.
Like he said, no, and they got along.
Yeah, but the thing is, the husband would father being the son, so they know what names meant.
Yeah.
It's not like it was a surprise.
Yeah, I don't get any impression of the time it took, but it's more just the trajectory of his life, at least. Okay, so he collects all that jewelry and makes an ephod or an ephod. I think it's ephod. What is an ephod? Does anyone know?
Is it a robe with some ornamentation, you used to talk about, almost for a priest of some sort?
Yeah. Yeah, so if you feel like you've heard the word somewhere in church before, it's a priestly garment. So typically a priest would, so the Levitical priests had an ephod. So you'd have your robe on, and then this was almost like a vest length type thing, and it was made of gold. It had gold plates. It had onyx. The high priest's ephod had like all these different colored stones, and they kind of show up throughout biblical prophecy and stuff. And it was what the priest would use doing priestly duties, but especially the high priest. It was a way that God would actually somehow make his will known through this priestly garment. It seemed to have different stones that kind of meant different things. I don't think it's terribly dissimilar from the ancient practice of casting lots, which they do throughout the Bible, but it's sanctioned by God, it's ordained, it's for the priesthood. And then Gideon goes and makes one. And the people he puts it in his hometown, and the people seem to bow down to that as some sort of sacred object. All right, what's the obvious irony about all of this?
Well, we keep saying that God's going to be our Lord, but he's doing everything but pointing them to God.
Okay. What else? If you remember last week. Yeah. Yeah, so last week, Gideon, his first act was to, in his hometown, tear down the altar to Baal. That's what gets him in trouble initially. That's what sets up the whole thing. And then now he has this sacred object back in his hometown that the Israelites are worshiping as some sacred, probably quasi-magical, whatever they believe about it. They are very interested in this object.
It sort of makes it sound like there wasn't tension between him and Abimelech. It's like it became a snare to him. Like he didn't do this on purpose. That ended up working against him. So maybe his initial intention was to give this so some priest could have it, but it never came to be that way. And these Israelites just started worshiping it instead. It's like, well, it's too late. You already made it.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it now.
Yeah.
Isn't there, he made this for him though, originally, right?
I don't know.
I mean, I don't know, that's what I got out of it. Like, because there's many passages in the scripture, I can't name them right now, but where you're supposed to know your place. Like, you just talked about it recently where, I forget who it was, a king.
Oh, Uzziah.
Was supposed to,
He wanted to burn incense in the temple.
if he wanted to do what he wanted to do, and he wanted to do it all. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah.
And ironically, because you read the end of the verse, in this, remember I asked you a while ago how much time you think it was in between when
Yeah.
you said, no, I don't want to be your king, go with God,
Yeah.
until he gave in, like, I just want
Mm-hmm.
it. But there's no wonder it's here. It actually uses the word as soon as he was dead. So,
Oh, yeah.
this thing that Greg said entrapped him.
Yeah.
Well, here it was the start, so it was really easy for them to just go all out back to that idolatry.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much time. So I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time.
You're big on the
It's like,
Big on the time there, huh? Yeah, Israel had a tendency to do that, no matter what the original intention was. But yeah, let's we got to move along. Okay, so we talked about his son. So Gideon's dead. He had that son Abimelech with his concubine who was in Shechem. And we just talked about what happened with the people of Shechem. Okay, chapter 9, verse 1. And Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem unto his mother's brethren, and communed with them, and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Speak, I pray you, in the ears of all the men of Shechem. Whether is it better for you, either that all the sons of Jerubbaal of Gideon, which are 70 persons, is it better that they reign over you, or that one person reigns over you? Remember also that I'm your bone and flesh. And his mother's brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem all these words, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, He's our brother. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Baal-bereth, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and light persons, which followed him. He hires a mob, basically. Verse 5, And he went unto his father's house at Ophrah, and slew his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, being 70 persons, upon one stone. Notwithstanding, yet Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. Yeah, that's a brutal start to Abimelech. He kind of makes a... What's up? Oh, okay. You look like you want to say something. Yeah, he kind of has a slightly salesman-like tactic. It seems that maybe, as the Gideon was the judge, maybe his 70 sons, had some level of authority in the area, like even just through posterity, even though they weren't technically a kingship. But he decides to kind of go, hey, well, you can have them kind of be in charge, or, I'm your people, I could be in charge. And they go with that. So he gets 70 pieces of silver from the temple of Baal and hires these people and kills 70 sons. So you kind of just average that out, like, each person is just worth like one piece of silver, kind of really highly devaluing that life there. Okay, we're on page 68 in your book. Question 12. Question 12, what type of person does it take to commit such a heinous crime? Can you elaborate?
Well, you wonder if he was the only one who was not living with the others. So maybe there's a lot of hatred, because they were the sons, and so was he, but he was the concubine, because they made a point of saying that.
Yeah.
And then, he was elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there was a lot of resentment.
Some sibling rivalry going on there.
When we think of an evil person in our lifetime, or even before we were born, but
Sure.
modern escapade, we can point out a few evil people like in our hand. This guy was evil. This guy was evil. It seemed more prevalent back then. Because look at all these crazy things that these people were doing. It just seemed like there was a whole lot more evil there.
Yeah.
I think there's just more suffocating now. There's just more ways to hide things. So that was the book right after that.
You think?
Discovery thing.
Think?
She was self-absorbed, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but, I don't know. It just seems like every time we turn around.
Violence was more prevalent.
It was more accepted to what is prevalent.
Yeah.
I feel like if you kill 70 people, somebody would be like, hey, you just killed all these, people with the same plan, we should probably go after you. And they're like, no, good job, man.
Yeah. You should be our king, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, and that kind of points out the idea of, okay, so whatever type of person it takes to do that, Shechem was cool with this. They were like, yeah, good job. You should be our king now. Awesome. So, whatever you think about that. Okay, so I wanted to read about this parable. We really don't have time. I want to respect your time here. So one of Gideon's sons did escape, and he has this parable of, he talks about trees. Maybe I'll just read it. I'll just read it. I thought it was clever. All right, so verse 7? Yep. So this is when Jotham, the surviving son, finds out that his other brothers are dead. Verse 7, and when they told it to Jotham, he went and stood on top of Mount Gerizim, and lifted up his voice and cried, and said unto them, Hearken unto me, ye men of Shechem, that God may hearken unto you. The trees went forth on a time to anoint a king over them. And they said unto the olive tree, Reign over us. But the olive tree said unto them, Should I leave my fatness, my good olive oil, wherewith by me they honor God and man, and go be promoted over the trees? And the trees said to the fig tree, Come thou and reign over us. But the fig tree said unto them, Should I forsake my sweetness and my good fruit, and go be promoted over the trees? Then said the trees unto the vine, Come thou and reign over us. The vine said unto them, Should I leave my wine, which cheereth God and man, and go to be promoted over the trees? Then said all the trees unto the bramble, Come thou and reign over us. The bramble said unto the trees, If in truth ye anoint me king over you, then come and put your trust in my shadow. And if not, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. What does that mean?
This is probably from Judges.
Elaborate.
Like the slow descent, and like, 'cause it starts off with the olive tree, and it ends up with the brambles, so it's kind of like they're getting worse as time goes by.
That's not how I take it, but I mean, that does fit.
This guy's a strict God of the power with Abimelech being king.
Yeah. Yeah.
All the nobler ones were put to death, and he's the bottom of the power.
Mm-hmm.
And he's good to go.
Well, and knowing that Gideon had refused to be king, so all the awesome trees, like, what I'm doing is too good. Like, I can't leave what I'm doing and kind of rule over you, but the bramble, the thorns, they'll do it. And the book kind of connects the ending of, in verse 15, the end of the parable to Abimelech, where it says about halfway through, if you don't make me your king, let fire come out of the bramble and devour the cedars of Lebanon. So they kind of take that and say, they're kind of transposing that back onto Abimelech, saying, not only did he become their king, it was kind of like, hey, make me your king, or else, so fire coming from the bramble to destroy the cedars of Lebanon, like the biggest, most beautiful, incredible trees around. It's not personally how I choose to express myself, but the parable works. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was clever. Okay. So about 3/4 of the way down, page 69, we see there's a paragraph that starts with the word sarcastically. All right, sarcastically, Jotham suggested it was possible that Shechem acted truly and sincerely in appointing Abimelech as their king. So as he explains what his parable means to them, he's like, hey, maybe, Gideon was good. He had defeated the Midianites. That helped you. Maybe you guys did the right thing in, killing all of his sons and putting Abimelech over you. Maybe by chance that was the good thing to do. But if not, and he gives this prophecy, and it's probably at the bottom of page 69, it probably goes on to page 70, he prophesied that Shechem would be the cause of Abimelech's death, and that Abimelech would be the cause of Shechem's destruction. Jotham's prophecy was fulfilled 3 years later. There's your hard time stamp. Okay. So you make Abimelech king, he will be your downfall, and you will destroy him. That's how the prophecy basically goes. All right, in chapter 9, we'll go with verse 22. When Abimelech had reigned 3 years over Israel, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the cruelty done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid upon Abimelech their brother, which slew them, and upon the men of Shechem, which aided him in the killing of his brethren. What do you think of that passage? Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it plays into some of the stuff. I mean, it seems like it comes up every week. It's the idea of God being in the world, like being the normal type things that we think, especially within government systems, in just world systems in general, that you think are just normal circumstances. It doesn't seem like they're disconnecting normal reality from the spiritual realm seems to be a modern Western mistake. The worldview that's outlined in Judges, okay, so it wouldn't be hard to imagine that this terrible guy Abimelech and the clearly not too moral people in Shechem, that eventually they might start to have problems. That wouldn't be surprising to anyone. But the Bible describes it as an evil spirit that is kind of instigating this situation. The people in Shechem start dealing treacherously with him. And so we don't have to spend too much time in the text here. I'll read from the book. They explain it well on page 70. There's a paragraph that starts, "The Shechemites revolted." All right. "The Shechemites revolted against Abimelech by placing liars in wait for him in the top of mountains. These men were keeping an eye on Abimelech's activities and waiting for an opportunity to ambush him. Meanwhile, they robbed travelers, which made Abimelech's reign look bad. The criminal activity caused further discontentment among other cities that Abimelech ruled. And fortunately, in the modern day, we have no parallel for criminal presence trying to make the current leader look bad. So I don't know what they're talking about. But let's go on. A man named by the name of, it's probably Gaal, probably a Canaanite and the leader of a band of marauders, went to Shechem and gained the confidence of the men there. Gaal didn't think very highly of Abimelech and his lieutenant Zebul, who Abimelech had left in charge of Shechem. Appealing to the Canaanites of Shechem, Gaal gathered a following. He was not without fault, however. He was a Baal worshiper who, in a drunken stupor, cursed and challenged Abimelech to field an army against him." So this gets a little tricky because the text decides to introduce like two new characters right at the same time, and it's tricky to start keeping track of people. Abimelech's reign has apparently moved beyond Shechem because he's not actually mostly centered in that city. He's off ruling other places, and he leaves this guy, Zebul, like his lieutenant in charge of Shechem. As the people of Shechem have been kind of raiding and marauding and causing general upheaval, this probably Canaanite guy is drawn to that. They seem to get along very well. And it's a funny little scenario that gets set up. So there are other Canaanites in Shechem. Gaal, this marauder type, they're all in the temple of Baal. They're having some sort of drunken pagan feast. And he doesn't know that Zebul, the lieutenant, is like outside. And he just kind of proudly, boastfully says like, yeah, who's Abimelech? I could take him in battle, no problem. He doesn't realize that Zebul has heard this. Zebul, the lieutenant, goes back to Abimelech and he says, hey, look, this guy, the people are starting to side with him. He's made threats against you. Here's what you're going to do. Or I guess Abimelech tells him, he's going to get an army together at the base of a mountain, and they're going to do it overnight. So they're out in the field at the base of this mountain, and like right before the sun comes up, we're going to attack the city. Okay, so that's the plan. Chapter 9, verse 35. And Gaal, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entering of the gate of the city. And Abimelech rose up and the people that were with him from lying in wait. And when Gaal saw the people, he said to Zebul, behold, there come people down from the top of the mountains. Zebul said unto him, thou seest the shadow of the mountain, as if they were men. So you have these two men standing here. Zebul, the lieutenant, knows exactly what's happening. He knows Abimelech is coming back. Gaal is like, I think there's some people out there. And he goes, no, you're seeing things. You're playing tricks on you. The shadows are just messing with you, which I think is hysterical. But, yeah, hysterical. I said it. It's hysterical. He has no idea that this whole plot's being carried out against him. So, as you would expect, the army comes. This does not go well for the interloping Canaanite, and a lot of people die. But Abimelech is not content just to kill these marauders. verse 45. Verse 45. And Abimelech fought against the city. So now he's turning against the people of Shechem all that day. And he took the city and slew the people that was therein, and beat down the city, and sowed it with salt. And when all the men of the tower of Shechem heard that, they entered into a hold of the base of the god Bereth. And it was told Abimelech that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together. Abimelech got him up to Mount Zalmon. He and all the people were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand, and cut down a bough from a tree, and took it and laid it on his shoulder, and said unto the people that were with him, What ye have seen me do, make haste, and do as I have done. And all the people likewise cut down every man his bough, and followed Abimelech, and placed them to the hold, and set the hold on fire, so that all the men of the tower of Shechem died also, about 1,000 men and women. So yeah, he viciously turns on the people of Shechem for supporting this other guy, for undercutting his reign. And not only does he kill as many people as he can, but then I kind of picture this like the way a Boy Scout would set up the fire in the teepee fashion. They sort of put it all around this big tower that they're all in and just sets the whole thing ablaze. 1,000 men and women, that's pretty brutal. And it seems like his reign continues. Just verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez, I don't know where that is, and encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and thither fled all the men and women and all of they of the city, and shut it to them, and they got up to the top of a tower. So you think, okay, well, we know what just happened. Towers are not effective against Abimelech. But, and we don't even necessarily have to read it, who knows how this story ends? Tell us how this story ends, Greg, as dramatically as possible if you can.
Abimelech is about ready to take down the tower. A woman drops a piece of millstone on his head, and he's critically wounded. And then he asks one of the soldiers to kill him, so he didn't get dishonored by being killed by a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. No, on his head. Yeah. Yeah, so that's exactly what happened. So woman drops a millstone out of the tower, seems to break his skull. He's dying. And he asks one of his armor bearer, maybe, to kill him. So it's not said that he dies from a woman. And 3,500 years later, we still know he basically got killed by this woman. And I'm a little more egalitarian than him. Man, woman, I'd prefer that no one kills me. But that's what happens, and the armor bearer is happy to end him and give him, I guess, a sense of honor, I guess. But the book does ask, what does Abimelech's last request reveal about his heart, even as he faced death? Prideful. Very prideful. What's that? Yeah, very big ego. Last question in your book, question 17. How does Galatians 6:7 ring true in Abimelech's life? First, does anyone know Galatians 6:7? All right, we got someone volunteering to read it. Sure.
Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap.
Yeah. And that seems to be playing out a lot in Judges. We've already talked about it a little bit in past lessons. This is definitely playing out in Abimelech's life. He sowed destruction, and he reaps destruction. And I guess by ancient Near Eastern standards, pretty shameful destruction. Yeah, he didn't even woman aside, he didn't even get to die like gloriously in battle if you take old standards by it. There wasn't much.
He didn't get to live the right old age, whatever either.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think either death is like honorable. Okay, so maybe you weren't technically killed by the woman, but you had one of your own guys kill you. That's
Everybody knew that.
yeah, it's not great. Yeah.
So a lot of times it doesn't look like that with all red. It doesn't look like they're religious.
Yeah.
And it looks like you got one up on God.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it one of the most,
It works out over time, believe me.
isn't this one of the most common things in the Bible? How many times do we read this yourself? Because that's what this thing's about in a way.
And that's good in it.
Yeah.
It's good in it.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a substitute? Because if all of the children were killed because one left, they still slew 30. How did the, or 70? How did the ones?
Yeah, they're a little fuzzy on the numbers.
Maybe they put a substitute.
Well, because that's the thing. So initially they say that there's 70 sons, and then they mention Abimelech. Is he one of the 70? Is he 71?
Yeah, but he killed 70.
Right, but then he kills 70, but one escapes. So I think if you want to be super technical about it, I think he killed 69. Like, I think it was the idea that he...
Maybe there was a substitute in.
Yeah, they did not, and I don't know, I guess, in fact, if the youngest one wasn't considered of age yet,
Mhm.
of an adult like a male, maybe they didn't count him.
Mhm.
The ancient writings seems to be like very, very good with like they destroyed everything except this. Well, did they destroy everything? No.
Yeah.
There's one thing.
Yeah.
Like the lesson 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
where they said, you kill them all. Oh, and then there's these other two.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're running, but they didn't kill them all.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like a literary device for the basic utter destruction, not necessarily the exact numerical. I did notice that. Yeah, it says he killed 70, but he clearly killed 69. And I don't think it's obviously a mistake or anything. Like whoever's writing it, it's right there.
That's good. In the movie, that's what we're doing. Right? We'll substitute.
There was a secret son that no one knew anything about. Yeah. Dramatized. Yeah, strong family resemblance. Yeah. But yeah, so in making it personal, just the last thing that the book has here, first under making it personal, is that the unbelieving people of Succoth deserved their thorny judgment. But instead of being critical of them, we ought to realize we all deserve to be punished for sin. And that's what I call the gotcha moments in the Bible. So you're always tempted to be like, those people. Whenever you think, Israelites, what are you doing this time? New Testament does the same thing with the apostles. You go, John, come on. Who's going to be on the right hand of Jesus? Stop. Why are you guys arguing? How do they say something this stupid? And if you find yourself saying that, that's when they got you. You go, that's the, he's battling those evil Pharisees. Me and Jesus against the Pharisee. Oh, wait. I might be the Pharisee. I might be the Israel. If there's someone you're thinking little of in the Bible, that's usually a clue. Yeah, every time. Yeah, even the ephod reminded me of the brazen serpent. Remember that in the wilderness? They're all bitten by snakes, and there's that gold serpent on a staff. And you find out in either Kings or Chronicles that, like, hundreds of years later, that thing was still around. And one of the kings had to destroy it because people had made it into an idol. And they'll, ephod, snake on a stick, they'll do anything. That's the story of, that is the turning point of the book of Judges. They're longer stories than the Judges initially, and they start taking this downward spiral of a turn. And Gideon sort of starts that all off. And we'll be looking at some more very tough, brutal people for the rest of the time. So that's what we have ahead of us. But that was good. We got to discuss a lot, and let's close in a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for this time that we were able to spend in your word, and even though there's stories we may not normally look at and they have different imagery and different ideas than we're used to, I pray that we can still gain an understanding of you first and foremost, and how you interact with people and how your power plays out in the world, and that even if it doesn't always come to pass exactly as it does in this text, that we understand that people tend to reap what they sow, and that's a spiritual principle well above anything that we might see in our normal lives. And I just pray that you would be with us and bring us back safely, and in the meantime, allow your word to have an effect on our lives going forward. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Thank you.